Welcome to the Bill and Patty Gorelick Gallery at Central Piedmont Community College's Central Campus. Mr. Gorelick and his late wife established these galleries, one on each of the college's 6 campuses, to bring art to people, students, employees, and visitors of Central Piedmont. Today it is my honor to welcome artist Barbel Brooks and her daughter, Anya Workman, to talk about fused imagination, an exhibit here on Central Campus.
Hi, my name is Anya Workman, and I am the daughter of Barbel Brooks, my favorite artist, and she's a glass artist, and it is a privilege to share a little bit of her story with you through an interview today. Hey, Mom.
Hey, Ann.
I obviously am very familiar with your work and the stories, and today I would love for you to share some of what inspires you, the science, the personal stories, to someone who has no idea what fused glass is about. Can you tell me a little bit about why fused glass and what got you started on this journey?
Well, I think you might have to stop me because once I start talking about glass, I start talking about my life because that's what it's all about. First of all, you use art glass and not window glass or any glass, glass that you drink from, things like that.
So it's a special type of glass.
It's a special type of glass, and sometimes it is very hard to get hold of just the right kind of glass because there's only one facility in the US left who makes this glass. And of course, it's not on the East Coast. It's on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon.
So you have this special glass. And what do you do with the special glass?
Okay. First of all, you have the special glass, and you change the structure in a kiln that heats the glass on either ceramic shelves or fiberglass shelves, and the glass starts to change. The first changes are visible around 1280 degrees Fahrenheit, but you can't really see it. But that's when this glass starts slumping if you hold it over 2 supports on either side.
So back up just a minute. You're using some interesting verbs, slumping. And so when I hear you say kilns, I think you're probably using a lot of heat, and you may refer to a firing schedule. Can you tell us a little bit about a firing schedule?
Yes, a firing schedule is kind of like when you have a recipe and they tell you you preheat the oven to 375 degrees or something like that. Well, with glass, you never preheat the oven, which is the kiln, because you want the glass to heat along with the kiln so as not to shock it.
So there's a lot of intention and planning is what I hear you saying.
Yes, and most firing schedules, most firing schedules have 6 to 8 sections to it, where you change the rate of the heat increase or decrease, and then you hold it at a certain temperature that you have to find through experience or knowing your kiln. And then these days it is much easier than in earlier days when you had to manually do this temperature change.
So
now
you
we
can
have
pre-schedule perhaps.
Yes.
Instead of manually calibrate your kilns.
Yes. And
so how many kilns do you have, Mom? I've seen your garagio, which is a combination of a garage and studio, and we call it the garagio. Tell us about your garagio, because I think if you've never been in there, it's kind of an interesting place.
Well, right now I have 4 working kilns, and there's one kiln, my very first kiln, that I just cannot quite part with. But
we're quite fond of the first kiln.
yes, and that's about, I don't know, more than 15, close to 20 years ago.
Right.
So,
and how big are those kilns?
Okay, I guess I start with the smallest.
So you have a baby kiln.
I have a baby kiln, and the baby kiln is
It's bigger
about,
than that, Mom.
Well, it's about 12 by 12, maybe. And it is a kiln that's actually supported on a very high metal stand that I put glass into a crucible, melt it, get it to a melting point. There is a hole in the bottom of the kiln, and when the glass gets molten around 1500, around about 1600 degrees, it becomes so molten that you can pull it out and manipulate it. And that's what you call murini, and there are some everywhere. There's some murinis everywhere.
So that's your first kiln.
That's my
the
first
baby
kiln. Okay. The second kiln is my second kiln is 14 by 14, and it's really a workhorse because I do a lot of test firings. Whenever I put big pieces like this in there are a lot of previous firings where I have to get the temperature right. The glass changes colors with temperature also, so I have to get the texture right, the color right. The whole concept has to come together in a test firing.
That one gets used a lot.
Yes.
Now going up in size.
Okay, going up, and those two we previously talked about are brick kilns. Then I have,
what does that mean? What's a brick kiln?
Well, a brick kiln is basically a big oven made of normal-sized bricks, like what you see on the outside of buildings. And there are elements included in the sides. And the lid of some of those brick kilns weigh anywhere between 50 and 80 pounds. So if you have an old lady like me who picks up a lid like that, that's hard work. So I have the two smaller brick kilns. Then I have a larger 26 by 26 inch fiberglass kiln where the base is brick because that does not have to be moved. And it heats very evenly. And there is a kiln in there, a shelf. The shelf is the surface that you put your glass onto. And then it has a fiberglass lid. And the advantage of a fiberglass lid, there are many advantages actually to it. It's lighter, so I can lift it with one hand very easily. It also heats and cools faster, which is an advantage on one hand, but you also have to keep tighter control of the glass because you cannot shock glass. When you shock glass with regards to temperature or any other influence, it breaks.
So 12 by 12, 14 by 14, and 26 by 26.
And then we have
the big one.
The mama kiln.
Tell me the size of the mama kiln.
Well, I think you could cuddle up in that kiln.
I'm not going to cuddle up in a hot kiln,
it's
Mom,
nice
but
and warm.
what are the size dimensions?
The mama kiln is 52 inches long, 28 inches wide. Again, it is a brick surface and a fiberglass lid. And that's how I'm able to make long pieces. These are 48 inches long. So this is how I make the long pieces.
So that size is really key for some of your bigger installations.
Yes.
The kilns are kind of the tools to your trade, if you will. And in this exhibit, you call it Fused Imagination. Can you tell me a little bit about the title and what that means to you? Now that we know what fused is, let's talk about the imagination.
Imagination is what comes out of your daily life, your experience, your mind, and you express what you feel. And this is my imagination, and this is basically my life.
So you could almost say interpretation as well as imagination.
Oh, yes, very much so. Yes.
So we're sitting in front of what's called crayon totems. Can you tell me a little bit about the name crayon totems and then why you have the colors arranged that you do, and maybe a little bit about the favorite techniques? If you'd like to start, tell me about the name.
Okay. Crayons came, I look at children, I remember when you were small, and it's like grab the crayon, and at first it was a box with 6 in it or 8 or something like that, and from a mother's side, it's to keep the child creative or
busy.
Busy work, yes. But it also is to give you a medium to express yourself. So I thought crayons for adults, we all need a way to express what we feel. And sometimes we have to express it in a very subtle way. I cannot go out in the world and say, hey, I like the rainbow colors, Roy G. Biv.
What is Roy G. Biv? It's
G.
been
Biv.
a long time since ninth grade, Mom. Science class. Tell me what Roy G.
And
Biv
I
is.
think intuitively we've been doing that at our house forever. It is the sequence. It is a sequence of the colors in the spectrum. So you have going from red to orange to yellow to green to blue to indigo and to violet. This is really arranged, and maybe that's where the physics comes in. To
So
the
bonus
wavelength.
that there are two greens in here. You have lime green and you have Kelly green.
Well, there are also two blues in there.
Bluish, indigo-ish.
Right. So I have a tough time sometimes making a choice or showing my preference, and then I just go either way.
So
and as an artist, I have a freedom that you as a writer most of the time has, but not always. So I can express it.
So the totems usually tell stories.
Yes.
And can you look at some of these and tell me about some of what you see behind some of the techniques and why you like those particular aspects?
Yes, I do. For instance, when I look at some of the techniques, I think you can see that most of it is rather organic and a flow type arrangement. But I felt I had to always have a little bit of structure in there. So when I look at technique, for instance, on the flow type, right here is what is known as a crackle technique. And when you look really close, there are islands of color with a clear canal or channel in between. And it's known as crackle. I actually flew to British Columbia, to Salt Spring Island. There's a very well-known glass artist, and I had the best time there. That was about 6 years ago or something like that. And I spent, and a lot of these workshops are by invitation only. I met some of my best friends there. And that's why I learned from Bob Leatherborough the crackle technique.
So
and
you
I
like
always,
the organic nature of the crackle.
Yes. And then...
And that speaks to you as far as the movement that's in there.
Yes. And then I sometimes even feel this is too linear. And then I include things like this or that, and those.
You're talking about
curvy,
like these
yes,
black ones?
Yes. And when we talked earlier about kilns, where I have the kiln on a stand and I pull the glass out, so I take the glass and I swirl it so I get curves. And I do that because sometimes I feel I don't want the structure. And most of the time when I get to the blues, I think you can see that I have more curve and more movement in blues than in other colors. It's just intuitively what I do because I have a close connection to blue.
So, Mom, tell me about these. What is special about these pieces right here?
Oh, they are not only special to look at, but they include a technique that actually we flew to South Africa to an artist who has never taught before. So I have admired her technique, and I have a glass friend on the West Coast, and she comes periodically to visit me, and she was visiting, well, I guess it was in fall last year, it was Halloween. She visited, and we were making glass and trying to find new techniques and just do our own thing. And this glass artist is called Marguerite Benneker. And she said, why don't we try to do some of Marguerite's technique? And we meshed and meshed, and we just could not figure it out. So then we said, we just send her an email and see if she will teach for us, just the two of us.
The power of Facebook.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
we send an email, and lo and behold, even though with 7 hours time difference, she came back and said, "You're welcome. When do you want to come?" So in February 2020, we flew to South Africa and we learned how to do this technique, which is actually you take very thin glass, thinner than normal glass. You paint with enamels in a very controlled way. You fire this in the kiln, again, very controlled, and then you include it in your work.
Mom, for someone who's not familiar, how do you start the process and how do you begin to make glass?
Well, glass comes in 3 physical states. Basically, for me to work with 2, it comes as in sheet glass, like there's a basic red and sheet glass.
Mm-hmm. So each one of the bottoms is a basic color?
Most of the bottoms.
Okay.
Yes. And then it comes in finely powdered glass. And then I have learned, again in one of my trips, to take the glass, the sheet glass that comes, I heat it up in one of my baby kilns.
Mm-hmm.
I heat it up to about 1300 degrees. I have a bucket. I put on all kind of safety gear. I put that 1300 degree glass into a bucket of very cold water, a series of buckets of cold water, and it goes shh, and you have tiny pieces of glass.
So it's like crumbles or pieces of granola, but it's glass that glistens in your hand.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to change a color, I can actually even put it between all kind of towels and things like that and make it very fine and sift it and put a fine layer of another color with powder over the top and thus change the colors.
So you have the sheet glass, the powder glass, and then
it's called frit.
The frit, which is kind
some
of
of these
chunky.
Yes, the chunky stuff is frit and some of it is powder.
Mm-hmm.
All these where you see the variation going from orange to pimento red is a variation in powder that I sifted together. So there's a wide range. And then you can get really a third color line. And I have to get just a little bit technical, not a whole lot. Glasses are made they are colorful because of the chemicals that make them up. For instance, this has sulfur in it. This has copper in it. Now, if you put the 2 together, you get a beautiful reaction line. If you fire it hot enough, you get this brownish reaction line, and I use that quite a bit.
Is that the amber one that you use in different shades?
Yeah, there's reaction right here. So yes, so that's another way of changing the color in glass.
So Mom, talking about each one of the colors, how do you keep the physical properties with the firing schedule in mind, and how do you think and coordinate all of that?
All right, if I want to keep the colors, there will be no reaction here because both of these are sulfur-bearing glasses. But if one were a copper-bearing glass, one a sulfur-bearing glass, I know that they only react at fairly high temperature. So therefore, I have to again test fire and see when I get the reaction. And most of the reaction occur at high temperature. Mm-hmm. So at low temperature, if I want to have something that afterwards looks like it and I can't quite, there is a reaction that is a little bit gentle. I have to fire high first and then come down and use the same piece and add it on and tack it on with heat. You cannot physically initially make it into a shape. I pre-fire a lot of strips. Like this is strips of tiny little 1 millimeter stringers that with heat I put on a separate piece of sheet and another kiln and fired first. After it has been fired and cooled and annealing is the controlled cooling down of glass. After I have done that, I cut it into segments and then I fire everything together to get this kind of structure. So it is pre-fired components that later on, most of these, by the way, have something like 5 or 6 firings in them by the time they hang. And each firing is between, I want to say, 24 and 36 hours. So that's a lot of time. Fusing glass has taught me many things, but one of the things that was the hardest was patience.
And specific to the curving of the glass or the turning and the twisting of the glass, you have become more organic in your approach. And in the beginning, I think there was a rigidity I remember from 20 years ago. And looking at your work now, I think you are more open to experimenting with the glass to see what the properties lead you. Is that right?
Oh, it's very right. I think that has not only something to do with what I have learned with glass, but because glass is, glass to me is my life and I tell my story with my glass. So I have experience. I'm very fortunate in that I had so many wonderful experiences. And I think it shows in my glass because it has become smoother, not just because of a better technique, but I think it's because I'm becoming a more well-rounded person in many respects. I have experienced more top spots, bottom spots, you name it. So all that later on shows in my glass.